versus wild caught fish, and what the pros and cons are to the two. Now, to be honest, I would have thought that, and that's a fish farm right there.
Wow, I've
and
never
as you
seen
can
one
see,
before.
yeah, those are individual little crates almost. So it's in a body of water, and think of it like a fencing. So they put the fish in the fencing so water can move in and out of it, out of the actual netting. So they're getting fresh water, and it's just placed in that body of water, and then they feed them in there, and then the fish come up and feed off the top and stuff like that. Whereas when you think farming, you think like a little gross pond.
I thought like in a warehouse where they would have like
they do
multiple
all of that.
tanks.
They
they do
do ponds.
that.
They do that,
Okay.
but
They
what
do it
I
in the
showed you
ocean.
there is the most common. What I just showed you there, and I just want to show the bay eating fish because it's natural.
cool.
But I just thought it was cool when I found it. But that being said, they'll put a lot of times one of the tactics to do this is they'll put the fish in those big like live aquarium things where the water can pass through, so they're getting clean water all the time. And then they'll feed them the enhanced food. Now for salmon, we'll stick with that specifically. Normally, what they'll do, and this isn't sustainable long term, they'll go out and catch small fish, churn it up into a mush, and then mix that with algae. That is actually where the omega fatty acids come from. So the small fish eat the algae, and then the bigger fish eat those small fish, and that's how the omega-3s and omega fatty acids travel through
quite the system.
to the big fish. Yeah, God's great. But so what happens in this case is they mix algae in with the mushed up fish, and then that's what they feed the salmon. So because of that, I was like, well, wild caught salmon versus farm raised salmon. Of course, wild caught's gonna be far healthier, and they're actually really, really close. Now the calorie content in the farm raised is higher, but the fats are also higher. But you got to remember, these are good fats. These
Correct.
are fats that you want.
Yes.
Whereas in the wild caught did have a couple benefits, more calcium and selenium, I believe, were higher in the studies that I read.
They have a more diverse diet, so they can eat a lot.
Right,
of
and they're
things.
leaner for obvious reasons because they're doing where they're not living in those things.
They can swim around.
And their quality of life is better, which is important. But the overall aspect of health, it was like in America and that system specifically was pretty close. And in some ways, you could argue farm is better. In some ways, you could argue the wild caught was better. They did say that the PCBs, there was a couple studies that found that the PCBs were up to 10 times higher in the farm-raised fish than the wild caught. However, that was still under 2% of what is actually safe for you to consume. So there still was no danger even at that level. And there's people that have debunked that because that study was in 2014 that I said they're actually pretty close.
Okay.
Long story short, the PCBs, you don't want any of them, and you don't want mercury, and you don't want different metals in your system anyhow. Follow the 3 C's for cleaning them. But realistically, with salmon in America, is not that big a difference, actually.
Interesting.
And I actually found myself liking the farming system, and here's why. It's necessary. Otherwise, if we were all targeting the wild fish and because 50% of the fish market is farm raised, at least 50%. Imagine if that went away and we just went back to only fishing the lakes and oceans and streams. And in some ways, we're already putting too much pressure on them now. You would overpressure the wild fish, and you could push it to extinction. I'm not one of the theorists that are saying we're overpopulated as a human civilization because it's been pretty debunked by a lot of people. But at the same time, the fish that are on the planet and how people's habits of eating fish has grown. We eat more fish now than we did years prior. So now more people are eating fish because of the omega fatty acids, because it's a healthier choice. People are more diet conscious, and people are choosing wild caught more now and organic more now than they were before. So long story short, in America specifically, and I want to be real careful on that because when I look at the studies done in China and some of the overseas fish like tilapia from China and stuff like that, they're fed soy pellets and they're in ponds that are actually on regular farms where cow manure and pig manure and stuff like that can seep into the waterways.
90% of our tilapia comes from those places.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to really watch where you're getting the farm raised from. you have to make sure every situation's different and every fish is different. So I would not be the person to say farm raised versus wild. You go with farm raised, it's fine because it depends what country.
Yep,
it depends how that fish was raised. It depends on the type of fish. It depends on a lot of things. But the salmon specifically, that was very interesting to me.
The saying goes, you are what you eat, what they eat.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you don't want in your body, don't eat those nasty tilapia.
You know what confused me was the PCB fact that you noted earlier, because the way that the toxins and the dioxins and all those things get into the fish populations is the smaller animals eat whatever they eat, and they bring in the mercury and all that stuff. Well, then the predatory fish, the larger fish, eat the smaller fish, and they take all that fish brought in, but then they go eat another fish and they get that one, and they go, so they build up these higher mercury levels, higher dioxin levels. So I'm surprised that farm raised fish were there in one location.
But you saw the location. They're in a somewhat safer. They're in an environment where there's pass through, and they're being fed a controlled substance versus the randomness of what you were talking about.
Yeah, so I would think that the PCBs would be much lower in farm raised.
Well, remember where the source of the food is coming from, though.
They're just chumming up.
They're chumming up wild caught fish.
Yeah.
So you're just
they're not regulating that then maybe.
Right. So you're still grabbing it from a condensed fish that was caught wild, and that's actually not a sustainable practice to feed them that way. So they're actually looking at new ways to feed them properly that would be sustainable, because if you're still going out and fishing, there's that. And then you talk about like the carbon footprint. So like, what is healthier for the environment? Well, if you're wild caught fish, you're paying for the gas and the boats to go out and the pollution for the boats to go out and catch them, things like that, bring them back.
That's also
then,
not
big
good.
factor.
That's also not good for other species, because you end up with bycatch when they're catching with nets.
Transportation. We're not against fishing, to be clear.
No.
But then the transfer to the market, there's carbon footprint there as well, versus the farm raised, it's all right there. And a lot of these farms, like you saw in the video there, are actually local, close to the cities and the markets where they're sold.
Yeah.
So if I was to, when I look at the whole picture, if I'm going to go to the store, and I really don't buy fish very often, I eat the fish I catch, and I hunt and fish so much that I don't really buy meat. So I live in a little bit of a different world than most. But if I was to go buy fish, I would err on the side of caution. I would probably still go wild caught, because I'd be knowing what I'm getting. There's less risk there. And if I was to go with farm, I would definitely want to know where that farm was, that it came from. And there's ways to know that, and there's different markets that you can do that. And a lot of times they'll put, like, even if you go to like Meijer or something, they'll put like U.S. caught or U.S. farm raised, blah, blah, blah. And then that they're under the standards that are in the U.S., whereas they're a lot more lenient in other countries, and that's dangerous.
I think that's important for either farm raised or wild caught, because wild caught, if you catch fish that are in what's that big floating garbage island that's out in the middle in the Pacific, that's another factor. There's all sorts of things. I don't think they're
ever direct on that, though. I don't think they'll be like, it's wild caught in Tahiti. I don't think that's a thing.
No.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
I've never seen it.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying I've never seen it.
Yeah.
But the idea that what somebody should take from this is, I err on the side of wild caught if I'm not eating the fish I caught. And with that being said, if you see farm raised U.S. salmon, it's not a dangerous thing. And if you have a deficiency of fish oil or something like that, or you need to get more fatty acids in you, it might even be a healthy choice.
That's a good point, because
and it's a good thing for our future as a world. It's not sustainable to do all wild caught.
No.
Yeah.